Hi, my name is Michael, and I'm from HeHasAnswers.com, a site that's still very much under construction, but will hopefully be up and operational in early 2020. What I'm going to share with you is of utmost importance for the future of Canada, the future of Western and even all nations, and the future of freedom for us and all our children going forward. So please do watch until the end and pause and take the time to view the other resources I reference. It's expected and perfectly acceptable if this takes several evenings to get through because it is just that important. Consider it a crash course so that you may have a working understanding of an issue which is very complex and contains a great many details within it. A lot of this information will be entirely new to you, just as it was for me. So please follow along carefully and do pause at any point to think about what you're hearing and to read the excerpts you're being shown. It's critical the information that's being presented is understood and thought over, especially because it will likely cause what is called a paradigm shift within your mind. And this is not an easy or comfortable thing. It's got everything to do with your worldview or sense of reality, how you view the world. When formerly unknown, true information enters a person's paradigm, it changes everything, but it can be very unsettling. That's why most people avoid or ignore information that causes such paradigm shifts and changes to the worldview they've grown into over so many years. Please do feel free to increase the play speed to make this video take less time, but if that causes you to miss the information being provided, do slow it down. It's okay if you watch and read and think about this over the next while. Just so you know where I'm coming from, I was born and raised in the beautiful province of Alberta in Western Canada. After high school, I went off and joined the Canadian military as an infantryman, serving for nearly 5 years in Ontario and doing one tour to Afghanistan before voluntarily releasing. That's like an honorable discharge back in 2006. I then went on to work in the oil sands industry and witnessed firsthand that Alberta undeniably has some of the highest environmental standards on Earth. Don't believe the propaganda out there. Not to mention being in a country where human rights are well established and protected when compared to some of the other competing oil-producing nations of the world. After 10 years of that, I was invited by my father into a role of management at his store as he worked on transitioning to semi-retirement while he sold the business. Nearly 2 years later, I was laid off in hopes of hiring more affordable staff to increase the new owner's profit margin. Since then, I've been supporting myself financially while writing what will be a free ebook to be distributed alongside the operation of HeHasAnswers.com. I've declined EI or the collection of unemployment insurance as I have not been looking for a job, and that's a stipulation for collecting EI, or at least it's supposed to be. So collecting EI without looking for a job, as I'm committed to finishing this book, would be unethical. I need to add that one of my closest and dearest friends came to Canada with his family as a young teenage refugee. He's an ex-Muslim who became a Christian with his family who converted back in their country of origin. And he definitely lives out his faith with sincerity and genuineness. I preface this conversation with that information because what I am going to share with you will undoubtedly for many viewers trigger the word bigot. But you have to dismiss that initial thought as it's one, just not true, and two, only going to hinder you from hearing the truth, like a wall before your mind. That word so often pops into the minds of people so that they will censor the person talking and sharing ideas and also stop the conversation altogether. What we are about to discuss is far too important for stereotypes. Besides which, those who truly know me would say I'm far from bigoted and a kind, caring, compassionate, and selfless person. With that out of the way, let's begin. This truth is undeniable and inescapable. We are in a battle of ideas for the mind. The battle is fought with ideas. Ideas influence the mind houses our will, and our will determines our actions. Therefore, to control the masses, you must control the individual, and this is done by winning their mind via ideas, be they of the truth or of a lie. Of course, those who value freedom and truth also value individual freedom and aren't going to share truth to control. It's only the lying tyrant and his lies that aims to control others. This is why the most important issue we face this election is not the economy, it's not the environment, it's not immigration, it's not gun control. It is inarguably freedom of speech. If you are no longer free to speak and share ideas, you are no longer free to defend all the other rights or discuss the issues you feel are important. Mark my words, our freedom and the freedom of everyone after us in Canada is at stake if we fall prey to ideas of deceit dispersed tactically to control us and the decisions we make at the ballot box, as well as in what information and ideas we choose to share with others. We need to defend our right to freely speak and exchange ideas so that truth can be told. To all my Christian conservative friends, please do listen carefully and watch closely until the end, and spend the next while viewing the materials and considering our future. If you aren't familiar with the Bible, some of these concepts may seem foreign, yet it is still completely valid, so please bear with me, and you'll see the unmistakable and unsettling connection. I do hope you'll consider all of this. In Genesis chapter 3, we witness the first time someone was usurped by an idea in this battle of the minds when the serpent deceived the woman with the words, "Did God really say?" followed by, "You shall be like God." This strategy has been used again and again throughout history to deceive and control, both by that same spiritual adversary and by the powerful, prideful people susceptible to him controlling them like puppets for his bidding. With this 2019 federal election fast approaching and understanding the agenda of this enemy, as well as the human agents he controls, I knew we had to get the Liberals out and a Conservative government in. I was giving the Conservative Party of Canada under Andrew Scheer my full support. I thought, what choice do we have? Although the Conservative Party slides further and further left as progressives every election in hopes of gobbling up a few percentage points of disenfranchised or conservative-leaning Liberals, meaning the party really isn't even conservative anymore, I was encouraged by members of Parliament like Michelle Rempel, who by all accounts looked like a genuine conservative. She'd taken Prime Minister Trudeau to task several times in the House of Commons, even pointing out his hypocritical feminist act to how he had no problem impressing his will upon former Minister of Justice and Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould and expelling former President of the Treasury Board Jane Philpott over the SNC-Lavalin scandal. Rempel's attacks were certainly justified. Then I watched this video titled, "The Conservative Party of Canada no longer represents the grassroots of our nation." Needless to say, I was shocked. Notice she mentions culture, education, and politics. This is where they sow the lies. Imagine not being allowed as a parent to lovingly help your own child understand they themselves were buying lies about their gender, which was leading them down an awful path that would be detrimental to their entire life. That may sound intolerant, but it's not meant to be. I love people who believe they're transgender, and I love parents with such children, but I love in truth. And it's a fact that although a concealed and poorly publicized one, this movement is unhealthy for children and will not resolve the pain that people feel in their hearts regarding who they are meant to be in this life. Just watch Dr. Michelle Curtella detail this in a short video, The Dangers of the Transgender Ideology. Another helpful voice is a gentleman named Walt Heyer, who himself had gender reassignment surgery and lived as a woman for several years before finding the real solution and returning to life as a man who now helps other people in the same situation. At that same information conference on transgenderism, a former trans advocate who totally reversed her position spoke out about its unfortunate realities as well. Honestly, it's not loving to affirm your child in this and help them go through this, but I believe in freedom, so fare thee well. However, parents have the right to talk to their children about this and not permit them to pursue such irreversible courses of action until they are autonomous adults. That's not child abuse, and government can't take that right and responsibility of the parent over their child away. But therein is one of the lies. It takes a village to raise a child, which sounds nice as if it's speaking of everyone helping you. But it is anything but, because it's actually about the village or government knowing what is best and imposing it upon you and raising and conditioning your child itself. I knew from this that my intuition that the Conservative Party of Canada had no moral anchor and had drifted far away from their conservative base was reality, and I could not go against my conscience by supporting a party that is obviously inundated by the same agenda filled with lies meant to erode our free society in preparation for a coming domination. On that note, watch this short video with Camille Paglia as she talks about the cyclical theme of societies crumbling as they begin to adopt transgenderism. There's far more information out there about societal behaviors and practices leading to national collapse throughout history as well, and a later video briefly touches on that. Then I saw this video titled "Andrew Scheer Caves to the Left by Kicking Conservative MP Off Committee." I've actually seen much more about the CPC which alarms me than this, but this is enough to help you see the truth and do more of your own research. And if you aren't subscribed to True North, an alternate news source which delivers thoughtful commentary from a conservative perspective, you should consider it, as they're very fair and they tell it as it is. Mr. Faisal Khan Suri implied that the reason the Christchurch massacre and the Quebec mosque shootings happened were in part due to the murderers accessing online conservative commentaries, which is just ridiculous. Conservatism isn't about hate. These individuals also viewed actual racist material that called for violence, therein being the real culprit. Compounding the issue is that the attackers had no personal restraint and a horribly skewed code of ethics and an understanding of what is justified in the sake of bringing change. I myself find racism disgusting. My being conservative and verbalizing conservative views does not mean I'm a danger to anyone, and to say so is ridiculous. Member of Parliament Michael Cooper was right to challenge the assertion, and he was right to point out the Christchurch shooter, quoting the shooter himself, who had rejected conservatism. Go look at all the hateful death threat tweets from progressive leftists against conservatives. Should we incarcerate those on the left who posted those tweets if someone actually goes and acts out violently after being inspired by them? That's not to say hate speech and death threats are acceptable, but conservative speech is so far removed from hate speech, which in our laws is dangerously subjective and arbitrarily defined, that Suri's making a connection in front of such an influential inquiry is obviously a ploy for future censorship of conservatives. Listen to the actual audio for yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having us. My name is Faisal Suri. I'm the president of the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council, AMPAC. Getting the gist of things now. To say it quite mildly, online hate influences real-life hate. To be quite blunt about this, online hate is actually an enabler, a precursor, and a deep contributor to not just real-life hate, but to murder. I think we've seen a lot of recent tragedies that have been happening across the world. In January 2017, in Quebec City, mosque killer Alexandre Bissonnette gunned down 6 Muslim men in execution style, where he came into the mosque with 2 guns and fired more than 800 rounds. The evidence from Bissonnette's computer showed he repeatedly sought content about anti-immigrant, alt-right, and conservative commentators, mass murderers, U.S. President Donald Trump, and about the arrival of Muslims, immigrants within Quebec.
Thank you very much, and we'll now move to questions. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Suri, I take great umbrage with your defamatory comments to try to link conservatism with violent and extremist attacks. They have no foundation, they're defamatory, and they diminish your credibility as a witness. And let me, Mr. Chair, read into the record the statement of Brenton Tarrant, who is responsible for the Christchurch massacre. He left a 74-page manifesto in which he stated, "Conservatism is corporatism in disguise. I want no part of it. The nation with the closest political and social values to my own is the People's Republic of China," close quote. And I certainly wouldn't attempt to link Bernie Sanders to the individual who shot up Republican members of Congress and nearly fatally killed Congressman Scalise. So you should be ashamed. Now, with respect,
at our committee. I do not. I have this speech in front of me, Mr. Chair, and there's nothing linking conservatism to that movement. If alt-right is limited to conservatism, that's conservatives' issue.
He said conservatism and conservative commentators. Those are his
guys. We're going to ask. We're just going to ask everyone who is not part of the committee to leave the room for a very brief period of time, and we will have you come back in as soon as possible. We apologize for taking away your time. It was important for the committee to discuss and deal with the issue. I'm going to give the floor back to Mr. Cooper.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I certainly find the comments made by Mr. Suri to be deeply offensive and objectionable and vehemently disagree with them, I will withdraw saying that he should be ashamed. That was not unparliamentary, but I understand it made some other members of the committee uncomfortable, so in the spirit of moving forward, I withdraw those specific comments, but certainly not the rest of what I said.
Having heard the entire exchange, does MP Michael Cooper really sound like the loose cannon the media is making him out to be? There's nothing wrong with this, and it definitely confronts the link Suri tried to make. Listen carefully, and he did indeed lump conservative commentators in with his recipe for eventual violence and death. It's inexcusable to do so. I think child molestation and pedophilia are abhorrent and of the highest magnitude of evil. Yet when I read in the newspaper about a child molester, I don't go kill that person, do I? No, because I have a little self-control. But if someone doesn't have self-control, should we ban all speech and media that may stir up anger in a person, be he liberal or conservative, to keep them from losing said control and killing others? The answer is obviously no. Read a commentary article by Diane Bederman for yourself. The bias against conservative speech is appalling. It was evident even in this discussion on hate speech in Section 13 being brought back to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which MP Cooper had been ejected from. If you watch this video by Canadian YouTube content creator Lindsay Shepherd, you'll hear clearly that MP Cooper was attacked and silenced at the May 30th session for asking another witness, Maxime Mithoowani, who attended a protest rally against Israel's military actions in Gaza against Hamas in Toronto, July 19, 2014. If she was there, then confirming her presence, where people were chanting anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rhetoric and pro-Hamas chants. Hamas is a radical Islamic terrorist organization, if you didn't know that. Other parliamentary members at the hearing came to her defense, deriding MP Cooper for this guilty by association questioning, even though Ms. Mithoowani was at the hearing to warn us of the dangers of hate speech, while she herself at one point attended a rally where hate speech was not only permissible, but encouraged. But days later, when conservative Lindsay Shepherd was being interviewed and then questioned for a past interview regarding what's called population replacement on a webcast, which has been known to also hold interviews with white ultranationalists and white supremacists, the questioning from liberals was permitted to continue even though Shepherd herself wasn't on that webcast as some sort of white supremacist or bigot, but as someone addressing the same sorts of matters even the UN has addressed under the title of replacement migration, another guilt by association move, but this time from liberals on a conservative. What happens? No one interferes, and they press her harder and harder, demonstrating for us the disgusting double standard. Ask yourself, why would Andrew Scheer, a conservative who should be protecting our freedom of speech, penalize an MP for doing what's right by publicly displaying just how hasty and dangerous it is for anyone to associate a mass murderer's manifesto with conservative free speech on social media, when the shooter himself disavowed conservatism and identified more with Maoist communist China? Andrew Scheer obviously cares little for our freedom of speech. As for this witness's attack on conservative free speech being linked intrinsically to hate speech and thus inciting violence, you must understand this is a tactic used to silence the mouths of dissenters, and it has been implemented by leftist radicals throughout the last century. You'll see this all more shortly as you listen to more programs. I now know without a doubt that the Conservative Party of Canada cannot be the party for me or for the freedom of Canadians, because they have clearly bought into the lies sown for so long to rob nations of their sovereignty, which progresses us all towards a global governance system. Although I don't endorse the colorful use of the language in this next gentleman's video, I agree with what he's decided about the CPC and what the only other option is. Here is his video commentary. Now it's time to talk about where this agenda of lies meant to confuse us and cause us to give away our freedoms actually came from. But first, some questions. Do evil people claw their way up out of poverty to rule tyrannically? Yes, they most certainly do. Adolf Hitler's a prime example. Do evil organizations conspire in order to profit off of the suffering of others? Yes, mafia, organized criminals, sex traffickers, they're all examples. So if both scenarios are true, why is it so hard for the general public to accept that seemingly well-to-do billionaires with more power than nation-states get together to determine where they, in their overinflated, prideful, self-aggrandized wisdom, think our world should go? Why are we so quick to label anyone discussing this as a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist? It's because the truth makes us uncomfortable. We'd rather just ignore it. But that's what these radicals are counting on and have conditioned us to do. Nothing. This first video is an interview from 1984 with ex-KGB operative Yuri Bezmenov. Oh, what a fun coincidence. 1984 is also the title of George Orwell's famous book about society turning into an oppressive dictatorship where everyone's freedoms have been stripped away. Just like what's happening today, only now it's far more subtle, conjuring up the imagery of a frog slowly boiling to death in a pot of water. Pay attention to everything Mr. Bezmenov says. Do you see the points of the agenda in order to break down a free Western society so that we, being propagandized and indoctrinated, willfully give up all of our freedoms? Anatoly Golitsyn, who wrote and published New Lies for Old, is yet another KGB defector whose warnings we should be heeding. Did you catch that the agenda involved the infiltration of our media, our schools, our churches and seminaries, and our governments? Did you hear how the spread of immorality was intended to break down the culture as well? Or how fond the KGB were of drug-induced meditation for programming people's minds? One more thing. Did you notice that Bederman, who defected to Canada, was safe from the KGB's threats of retaliation simply because he told them he owned firearms here in Canada, where back then there was less gun control? Yet all the time in the debates, we're fed the lie that the right to own guns isn't to protect the populace from their governments becoming more and more tyrannical, or nobody needs that for self-defense. Why do you think they want our guns? The People's Party of Canada has already stated they will repeal Bill C-71 that has opened a backdoor for sweeping prohibition of firearms that law-abiding citizens have every right to possess. What's Andrew Scheer's take on it all? If they're willing to give up our other most important freedoms, why would we trust their promise to repeal BC 71? Another important book would be None Dare Call It Treason by John A. Stormer. Don't be deceived by the detractors out there. This book is not a bunch of fake news. In fact, many of the agenda points forewarned have already taken place, according to plan, which has even more nefarious ties than you can imagine. The reality that Stormer's forewarned agenda points were accurate and are happening should tell you the detractors telling you just to ignore such books aren't telling you the truth. Part of the agenda to steer our society away from conservatism and national sovereignty is also played out via social media tech giants who have no problem silencing conservative speech that is gaining too much traction and influencing too many people, which inhibits the agenda leftist ideologues in Silicon Valley are privy to and a part of. They soft block, shadow ban, and outright deplatform those not towing their line of narration. Canadian alternative investigative news journalist Lauren Southern knows about this because just recently her rather objective but very eye-opening Borderless documentary about the people smuggling industry around the European Union disappeared from YouTube for a while. See her comments on this here in another video. Again, free speech is under attack because the truth is too dangerous to the radical leftist. Look at the trends of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube bans, and you'll see it's conservatives and those opposing the agenda we're talking about here. Thankfully, Canada is a few years behind the travesty in Europe under the laws of the EU, but unless we elect the right representation, we will catch up promptly. 3 things need to be addressed before we continue, and they are all clearly being introduced into our world as we speak. One world government, one world currency, one world religion. All 3 of these things were prophesied about in the years 94 to 95 AD by the Apostle John in the book of Revelation. You can see the below links. That being said, Diane Markel's weekly radio show, Understanding the Times, is an excellent resource for gauging our political climate. Recently, a 2-part series was on with an independent documentary producer named Curtis Bowers. His documentaries, Agenda Grinding America Down and Agenda 2, Masters of Deceit, expose so much of this information. In video format, these would be an excellent resource for us who appreciate freedom to become more alert and discerning about what we are actually faced with today. The links to those 2 radio programs followed by the trailers and a link to where they can be purchased are in the descriptions below. I know that many conservatives, particularly Christians, are concerned with loving people and being compassionate, and that is what we, in a great country like Canada, should be concerned with. But the idea that only the Liberal Party or the New Democratic Party cares about people because they're so quick to introduce new and costly social justice programs is a lie meant to make conservatives out to look heartless and unsympathetic. Already, the People's Party of Canada has been the victim of a fake news smear piece falsified to make the PPC look like racist white supremacists. And they're all lies. You can read about it here. This is precisely the sort of reason behind their position to defund the CBC immediately and permit it to continue only as a privately funded entity similar to PBS. I think that's smart. The irony surrounding this audaciously false claim that the People's Party of Canada is a party of racists and bigots is that it's full of members and supporters from all different ethnic backgrounds. If you watch this excellent panel discussion with PPC leader Maxime Bernier about free speech being endangered, you'll see a number of those asking questions at the end are originally immigrants, i.e. Kenya. Notice the concerns from the immigrated Canadian from Pakistan are regarding how easily the Islamization of a culture leads to radicalism. I think he would know better than us, for that's why he escaped his country of origin in the first place. That's not Islamophobia, friends. That's a valid conversation we should be having frequently, and the PPC isn't anti-immigration. They simply want immigration to remain sensible while reducing it when it has risen from just below 100,000 people per year in the 80s to 250,000 people annually today. I would hope they find a way to also vet people ideologically. Sure, free speech is a right for Canadian citizens. But if someone is here who isn't a citizen or wants to come in and they are radical and violent and condone violence as a response to speech they disagree with, why would we want such buffoons in Canada? I used to go to bars and nightclubs every weekend, and often I saw people fighting over nothing like fools because they can't handle their aggression. Why increase that percentage of people? It'd be easy enough today for the IRCC, RCMP, and CSIS to just look at a person's Facebook timeline for the last 5 years, and if they're posting threatening material which accepts unjustified violence, send them a decline notice. If their bank records say they give to charities which are known to support terrorist organizations, don't let them in. This can't be too difficult. Now, I don't mean to pick on Muslims. I know many who are wonderful people, but there are already a percentage within Canada demanding Sharia law, which by no stretch of the imagination is compatible with our culture. It wasn't compatible with the culture of Britain either, but go look what's happened there. There's been marches in Toronto for Sharia already. Just watch this woman's testimony about her awful upbringing in Iran. You don't have to look far to know honor killings, acid attacks, and female genital mutilation is happening in Western nations like Canada, the United States, i.e. Michigan, and Britain. Why would you want more of that here? Why would you want people electing sympathetic MPs and MLAs who will change our laws to accept Sharia? I recommend receiving emails from Clarion Project to know what's going on. It's a great watchdog resource for information from commentators who are Muslims, Christians, and secularists who are all concerned about Islamization and extremism because, look around the globe, it never bodes well for the freedom of individuals. In fact, here's a fun article from Toronto just the other day titled Hate Fest in Canada and Times Square, where anti-Semitism was permitted and tolerated right here in Toronto. What a misinformed chap there screaming on the microphone in Times Square. Israel's existed at least 3,200 years ago. Read a history book and look into archaeology. Also disconcerting is that children in radicalized Muslim countries all over the world are taught to hate. There's places where every day children start their classes chanting "Death to America, the big Satan, death to Israel, the little Satan." Even my best friend who started life in such a country still remembers the words to a song they sung about the blood of their enemies being on their claws. Why would anyone teach this to children? Why is this sort of thing already happening in a Philadelphia Muslim community center? Yes, the city of brotherly love. Now, an offense of this from administrators was that it was an oversight and an accident, that these words got into their songs and poems. How is that possible? Someone taught them the songs, someone helped with the poems, and if not, why are these children motivated to write such terrifying words? Trust me, I went to Sunday school. I did Christmas pageants based on the Bible growing up. We never recited anything even remotely horrible, nor were we raised to want to. Now, the proper response by the conservative after reading and watching all of this is not to grow in bitterness and hatred and animosity towards Muslims. It's to be kind to them and show them conservatism and freedom and the Canadian way of life are wonderful things, hence why there are already conservative Muslim supporters of the PPC. For Christians, it's not to have your Chrislam days and discuss the similarities between beliefs. It's to love them as Jesus Christ does, sharing with them, with winsome compassion and boldness, the truth of the gospel, and that Jesus Christ is far more than a prophet after Moses, so that they may be set free as you and I are. With that, this idea that social programs and social justice must be promoted by the church is a myth as a result of the socialist communist agenda for control, as you've learned now if you've been listening to and viewing the linked resources. Jesus Christ wasn't about the gospel as social justice we now see, nor was he about believers opting to give more and more of their money to the government as taxation. Why not if he said, "Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's"? Because as we've seen in the last century, and as the socialist agenda intended on, big government who aims to supply all our needs has become Messiah, Savior, and God to the people when that place is reserved for God alone. Praise God Canada, or rather the Dominion of Canada, so named thanks to a godly Christian founding father of Canada suggesting it due to Psalm 72:8, was founded on Christian principles which endowed men with freedoms and low taxes while churches were the ones who provided the social services for people to the glory of God. Why did we get away from this? Because that was the deception of the agenda. We should be electing parties that lower our taxes so we have more autonomy with where our money goes, so we aren't forced to support anything that goes against our conscience. Before about 1917, there wasn't even income tax. Our government received most of their revenue through customs. That means if you wanted to avoid tax, you didn't buy foreign products and pay the hidden tax which business owners make you pay through raising their retail prices to cover the tariffs they first paid. Our taxes have skyrocketed and we can't seem to balance a budget because our governments so often look at tax revenues irresponsibly with no accountability. It's like free money. Why opt to give them more? Having said all this, let's finish by returning to the enemy first mentioned in our opening, the serpent, the father of lies, who was a murderer from the beginning. Many people today are so sadly mistaken in thinking socialism is this wonderful humanistic ideal. If everything you've listened to hasn't freed you of that yet, hopefully what I'm about to tell you will. Socialism was thought up by God-hating men like Karl Marx and adopted by other God-hating men like Vladimir Lenin. One is forced to ask themselves, if these men and their political offspring had no problem whatsoever utilizing lies to further their agenda of world domination, then what spirit was behind them influencing and guiding them? It should be obvious. And when we look at the directives of their agenda, they align remarkably well with the agenda of their spiritual source, that same lying serpent, Satan. Don't believe me? Read on. Aleister Crowley was the foremost Luciferian occultist of the 20th century, which means he worshipped Lucifer, aka Satan. He influenced all manner of people, from politicians to entrepreneurs to celebrities to musicians. The Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and the Rolling Stones are just a few who attribute their success to the destiny-shaping magic he taught. The New Age law of attraction stems from Crowley's Luciferian teaching. Crowley himself was heavily influenced by the teachings of Madame Helena Blavatsky, a theosophist from the 19th century who herself influenced so many powerful players in her day. Theosophy is yet another secret mystical teaching that aimed to bring about a one-world religion and was utterly steeped in occultism as well. Aleister Crowley and his new wife, just into the 20th century, spent their honeymoon in Egypt, opening themselves up through meditation to channel a spirit in order to write what would be titled the Book of the Law. The spirit that communed with them, Crowley would later admit, was none other than Lucifer himself. Crowley was no charlatan, friends. Crowley was giving marching orders throughout the remainder of his life, and he wrote down that agenda from the devil so that he could bring it to pass. His hope being that he would see the arrival of a child of Horus to rule the world. Yes, the Antichrist. Crowley himself being known as 666 the Beast. Well, guess what? The agenda was, of no coincidence, much of everything the socialists and communists aimed to also use to bring down free Western society where people freely practiced and lived by Christianity. Rampant sexual perversion, rampant drug use to open the mind to new ideas, the destruction of the traditional family unit, the infiltration of the church, the youth group and the seminary, as well as politics, the media, and the educational system. I wish I was making this up because it's so disturbing, but I'm not. It's obvious why there is a link. It's obvious why our freedom to think and to speak is being attacked so vehemently. They've just gotten better at sowing their deceptive doctrines in our midst. If you're having trouble believing this, you're welcome to spend 3 years researching it all and connecting all the dots as I have while writing my free ebook slated for release in early 2020. But we only have a few months before this election. The devil has always wanted to take the place of God as ruler over humanity, doing so through human agents. But you can't very well rule a whole planet when it's divided into separate sovereign kingdoms or nations, can you? So we see two things happen throughout human history. After Cain was tempted to kill Abel, he wandered away from his God-honoring family and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden, where he would build the city of Enoch. This place was godless and grew worse and worse, as the spirit governing it, Satan, used his usual operations of lies and deception to bring humanity into a chaos of immorality, using prideful people like Lamech, no doubt. Then we have the Tower of Babel, where yet another prideful and wicked man, likely Nimrod, convinced the entire population of growing humanity to build the tower and remain in one location in utter defiance of God, who'd commanded them to go out and fill the earth. Why does God keep spreading people out? Have you guessed yet? Later, we see prideful, powerful men like King Ethbaal or Ithobaal III ruling over wealthy Tyre, whose name literally means with Baal or with the Lord, when Baal was another name for Satan, the false lord. The prophet Ezekiel is compelled by God to challenge Satan, who had possessed Ithbaal. Then we have another prideful, powerful, wealthy fellow, Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of the Babylonian Empire. He's also challenged by a prophet of God, Isaiah. Yet again, Satan within this ruler is also addressed. Do you see the ongoing theme of the devil continuously using the most powerful people to hopefully bring about a system of world governance? Fast forward 600 years, and we have the Roman Empire, the grandest empire of them all, and Caesar Augustus declaring himself to be the Son of God. Well, it's no wonder God sent his son at this point in history to set things right and conquer the works of the devil. Much later, we have Adolf Hitler, whose final solution was to wipe out one part of God's chosen people, the Jews, but he also wanted to establish the Third Reich, which translates literally to the Third Empire, as world domination was his end goal. Have you figured out yet why God keeps people apart in sovereign kingdoms and nations? He's keeping us from uniting under a one-world government ruled by Satan through a final man destined to come, the Antichrist. Why do you think the idea of nationalism or pride in one's country and a desire to uphold and maintain its uniqueness is attacked and labeled as racist today? Friends, nationalism and pride in your country isn't racist. Ultranationalism is a very different story. The question to the professing Christian is, are you, in the name of sentimental false love, the same love Aleister Crowley and the Beatles espoused, furthering the agenda of Satan by advocating for a borderless society? I once asked of a seminary professor what his thoughts were on the idea of unity being a higher priority than truth, and love being more important than correct biblical doctrine. His response? Hey, it's like the Beatles said, all you need is love. I grimaced before asking him, did you know the Beatles were occultists? His whole paradigm had been influenced and shaped, in part, by the music he listened to growing up, and he couldn't see the dangerous deception in it. Church, are you sensibly opposing the obviously satanic globalist agenda while looking forward to the true kingdom of Christ, which he will manifest himself when he returns? And by the looks of it, with so many of the birth pains converging all at once, and with the recreation of Israel as a nation despite insurmountable odds on the exact day the Bible prophesied it would, May 14th, 1948, because the majority of end-time prophecies revolve around Israel being a nation, and looking at the moral and spiritual state of our world, we should be living with a sense of gospel-centered urgency. I should add, Christians need to go and make disciples around the earth as instructed to do so by faith, not dissolve the borders God established to invite everyone in. Missions to go and love your neighbor are the real self-sacrificial love we're called to, as opposed to, yet again, false love that puts at risk the security of the local neighbor we're called to love as ourself. And with a Canadian passport requiring no visa or lax visa requirements all over the globe, it's easier than ever to just go on a vacation, you tell the customs agent, and then meet and teach people the truth while establishing house churches with very little money initially needed to be raised. You've been told by God to be sober-minded and alert because this enemy is real. We're commanded to resist his schemes. Why would you not protect and exercise your God-given freedoms? Freedoms he's also blessed your local neighbor with, by sharing this truth with others and voting for politicians who will protect those freedoms, which will slow the advancement of the globalist agenda. You've got the ability and thus the obligation to protect those freedoms in as peaceful a way as possible, i.e. information sharing and voting responsibly. For those of you who believe we should be passive in this, at least love your neighbor enough to oppose it for their sake, true? If you don't think you should, find a senior citizen who emigrated to Canada from the Soviet Union, or any Christians who've recently come from China, or North Korea, or Pakistan, or Iran, and ask them what it was like growing up and if earthly freedoms are something Christians should advocate for. This video will tell you their answer. And no, I don't support outright ecumenism. It's no wonder the missionary couple I support in the Middle East asks in every email update for prayers for their safety and protection. They're in places where you aren't free to share the good news about Jesus. Why throw that away here? I don't mean to be harsh, but professing Christians are often too afraid to share the gospel in Canada as it is now. How is it going to get easier when doing so becomes illegal and penalties for doing so escalate towards imprisonment, or worse, just as the Bible foretells? That being said, the theme continues as for the last century and to this very day, we do indeed have very powerful, prideful, wealthy, and influential people believing they have all the answers for humanity to be successful in its survival. But it can only happen under a one-world government that they control. Again, the devil uses people who are prideful. And this is why there is so obvious an agenda. They've been funding it, and why our freedom of speech is being stripped. This is what we need to be voting against. A couple other talks worth listening to are by a fellow named Gary Allen, who researched the biographies of such wealthy people and published 2 books in the 70s. Someone actually scoffed at me recently saying, those people have no influence anymore. They miss the reality that this agenda initiated by such people and their families that they belong to has been in motion for over a century. The ideologues got into the schools, and after a couple of generations, those people were the teachers and in the media and the press. And after the 60s, they were becoming more powerful within politics, always furthering the agenda, most of whom don't even know it. Those who got the ball rolling won't be in the limelight as much now, given the impression to the unaware that they've lost influence. But that doesn't mean they aren't involved already. I should add, for the benefit of our unbelieving friends viewing this, some of the most obvious evidence for the existence of the God of the Holy Bible is that the devil described therein is clearly real, and of little coincidence, everything God says he abhors is exactly what the devil desires take place, and exactly what we see happening all around of us today. When if it were all fictitious, we wouldn't have this tendency to rebel against God with such specific behaviors, would we now? In closing, I know you are concerned about splitting the vote. I am too. That's why I've prepared all this. Truth and information sets free. I recognize the irony is that the radical leftist uses fear to control people, and what I've divulged to you is fearsome. The difference, of course, is I'm providing a summary of the truth to maintain freedom. That's why it's the most important issue to vote on. Concerning vote splitting, the reality is that the Brexit Party in the UK formed and existed for only 6 weeks before getting the most votes. Just look at these election result charts. Yes, globalist news outlets are already spinning it to say Brexit isn't what people want, but it's easy to see the lie in defense of the globalist agenda. I'm going to be posting this to my Facebook, even though I know many people will think less of me. My freedom, your freedom, and their freedom is worth that because this information will set a lot of people free. I invite you to have courage, not worry about people's opinions of you, and do the same. If we can help people understand the truth that a vote for the Conservative Party of Canada is a vote for centrists who will give away our freedoms, real conservatives will vote for the People's Party of Canada. In fact, if you look at the hashtag walkaway movement in the United States, yes, started by a male homosexual hairstylist who was tired of Democrats using him and other minorities as political pawns while doing next to nothing for them, you know that liberals who care about freedom and who are rational thinking people who see how vile the left's tactics for silencing conservatives' oppositions are, they will vote PPC too. If someone can wake up and leave Antifa, a liberal on the left can wake up and vote for the party that will protect their future and the future of their children. Here's the worst that can happen. We mobilize and help people truly understand the dangers coming from the left, and come election time, it doesn't look like the PPC have a chance. Go vote for CPC if you want. Meanwhile, a massive exodus from the CPC to the PPC would wake the CPC up to their issues. But guess what? I think it's too late for them ideologically. They're clearly along for the ride. But at least you'd get to vote for them. I think we should turn the projected House of Commons upside down, as Laura Lynn Thompson puts it, by all leaving the CPC to vote for Maxime Bernier's Party of Freedom. Do you recall the 2016 presidential race to the White House? The polls were clearly framed to make it look like Hillary Clinton would win by a landslide. Why? Well, the powers that be were using those polls to discourage conservatives from going to vote by making them think, well, we've lost, so why bother? Talk about propaganda. Don't think we wouldn't see the PPC treated the same. The best litmus test is the same one I and others used to know Trump would win. We looked at social media, and we looked at Trump's rallies in comparison to Bernie's and Hillary's, and saw the massive amount of support Trump actually had. So if you do your part and come fall you see there won't be enough support for the PPC, fine. But this could and should take off if we all talk openly with our friends and coworkers and share the truth of where we are headed. If every conservative, rational thinking person who could see the dangers facing us decided to vote for the party that will defend free speech, which leads to freedoms and improvements in every other area, we'd easily have a 55% majority. The PPC supporters plus the CPC and Liberal NDP voters who #walked away. We just have to be willing to calmly discuss these issues and show people the truth. If you do only a little research, you'll learn, as I did, that Maxime Bernier beat Andrew Scheer and came in first in every round of voting in the CPC leadership race of 2017. And he was beating him in every popularity poll and lost by only 1.9% in the final round. And it looked fishy. Over a year later, Fed up with how corrupt and non-conservative his party was, Maxime Bernier announced the founding of a new truly conservative party and had a great deal of support immediately. It would take very little to grow that support and momentum again. And if you're worried the PPC won't be effective fiscally and economically, what with 6 out of 10 provincial governments being conservative now, I'm sure a coalition is going to lead to great things for our country, regardless of which conservative party is in power. So why not make it the one who won't be selling our freedoms out? Besides which, Andrew Scheer has gone soft on his promises about the budget. You should sub to this alternate media conservative commentary as well. Grassroots movements start like this. Everyone doing their part to share and educate friends and co-workers on the issues and the truth and the dangers and threats we face. Now let's share this truth across our beautiful nation, which stretches from sea to shining sea. Thank you all for taking the time to watch this and listen to and read the resources. I know they will have helped you see this world more clearly. And for my non-Christian conservative friends, I respect the spiritual aspect may have come as a surprise, but it is the truth. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. That wasn't a famous quote by Barack Obama. It was originally Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ. And God knows you, He loves you, and you need to know Him as Lord and Savior to enjoy Him forever with eternal life. So if you want to ask me some questions in the comments, or in person if you know me, I'd be happy to. Truly, as good as it is to protect and maintain our freedoms in hopes of maintaining a healthy country, the truest solution both for our nation, but most critically for our own souls, sanity, and salvation, is as a nation to return to our Christian roots and individually to repent from sin and unbelief and avoidance of our true King, the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. To some degree, that's what this YouTube content creator who's known for dropping red pills to wake up the masses seems to acknowledge in his solution. I don't agree with the last 5 minutes of his video, as it deviates from the truth of Jesus Christ to something more akin to erroneous New Age beliefs and New Age spirituality, which, as it is so broad and easily accepted by everyone and anyone, is precisely the sort of spirituality likely to be utilized as or with the coming one-world religion. But I include this video for the truth it contains about what happens to societies who abandon God, most notably Christ. Lastly, to my local friends, if anyone would like to set up a viewing party to watch Agendas 1 and 2, a total running time of 3 hours, we should definitely organize that. It would be massively beneficial. I'm also going to include in the description links some well-known pastors whose sermons I listen to on an almost weekly basis who have helped me know God more and more, and I invite you to prayerfully listen to them as well. Now please, go like the People's Party of Canada Facebook page to watch and support the movement. May God bless you. And may God bless Canada.